Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing great conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. First off, your AI fact of the week. We frequently discuss the A in AI, and we frequently talk about it more accurately being described as augmented than artificial. Well, today, most AI is used, in fact, to augment the capabilities of humans. Just this week, we learned about two new innovations in the medical community that use AI to make doctors better and improve patient outcomes. The first, AI from Isono Health, is helping oncologists detect breast cancer using a whole breast wearable device that takes about 1 minute versus the traditional 15 to 20 minutes, and it improves accuracy of detection by about 37%, helping those oncologists. The second example is from Vidya Health, which recently received approval to help dentists improve cavity detection. Again, AI helping the dentist, helping the medical professional. According to FDA results, the system reduced false negatives by 43% and false positives by 15%. Pretty impressive. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, we went from punch cards to keyboards to joysticks to mice and ultimately to touchscreens over the last 25 years. Now, voice is really becoming the predominant input mechanism for pretty much all technology. But unlike traditional text input, voice has a lot of natural impediments. It's intuitive, but only if voice to text translation is highly accurate, which it hasn't always been in the past. Background noise, accents, low bandwidth, they can all drop accuracy below 80%. And believe it or not, when 20 out of every 100 words are misinterpreted, the advantages of voice quickly become a liability. Today's voice-first computing tasks are largely restricted to digital assistants like Alexa or Siri, and also note-taking in meetings. A tremendous amount of investment has gone into making voice a first-class citizen, as companies like Gong and Chorus, voice-first unicorns, have proven. Today, we get an in-depth view into the challenges and also the opportunities of voice technology with one of the foremost pioneers in the space. Krish Ramineni, founder and CEO of Fireflies.ai, had a bold vision to transform meetings and unlock the value of conversation. If he and the team were successful, you may never again wish you could remember what someone said on a call yesterday, last week, or even last year. Krish spent time in product management learning from the best at Microsoft after having graduated summa cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania. Krish and the team set out to disrupt the multi-billion-dollar emerging market. His progress to date indicates it is working. Krish has raised nearly $20 million since inception, including a $14 million round last May, led by Khosla Ventures. More than 35 organizations use Fireflies, and revenue has more than tripled in recent quarters. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Krish to the podcast. Krish, welcome, and why don't we get started by having you share maybe a little bit more about your background and, of course, the vision for Fireflies.
Hey, Dan. It's great to be here, talk to a fellow AI enthusiast. So I'm excited to talk about Fireflies, talk about AI, talk about voice intelligence in general. So very, very excited about this space. I'll start with I guess my background, where I got started. So I went to Penn, and then after that, I was at Microsoft in the product management role across a suite of Office products. We were working across several teams. Had a chance to work with the Skype team as well as like some of the NLP teams that were doing lots of great innovative stuff. So we've all used spell check and grammar check since like the 90s, right? So the amount of NLP and work that goes into making that work really well, that got me really fascinated. I guess the precursor to Fireflies was just how much time I was spending in meetings and the challenges that I had as a PM attending back-to-back meetings, not having perfect recall, having my OneNote in every meeting, right? Like, or my Notion doc, and like just following up afterwards, sending off those long email threads. So that ended up taking a lot of work. Maybe 50% of the time was a lot of this administrative stuff versus focusing on engineering and product and innovation. So that really kicked off the inspiration for why we started Fireflies. And what Fireflies is today for the audience, it's an AI voice assistant. It joins your meetings across Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, all the major video conferencing platforms. And it takes notes, transcribes the meetings, summarizes it, and afterwards makes everything searchable. And then we have a suite of enterprise products and capabilities as well that provide insights, analytics, sentiment analysis, all of that on top of those conversations. And it's been a very exciting journey. In the last couple of years, Fireflies has scaled and has been used across 60,000 plus organizations now. So from 35,000 up in the past year. So it's been a very exciting journey, to say.
This is not a paid endorsement, but I've used it and I love it.
Thank you.
Just talk us through a customer that you're most proud of. How do they use Fireflies?
Yeah, the interesting thing here is that we have so many diverse use cases. Our vision is that all knowledge workers should have technology like this. We want to democratize AI, what was previously very, very expensive, right? Speech to text, right? Transcription, all of that we're starting to democratize it, and so that every person can use it. And we have use cases and customers across various sectors, sales being a low-hanging fruit, where we have a quarter of our customers, maybe 30% or more, that use it in sales meetings, client meetings, any customer-facing interactions. We have recruiting teams that use Fireflies to interview candidates and capture all that information and then pass it along to hiring managers. We see people using in internal meetings, product meetings, planning meetings. So it's hard to pinpoint one favorite customer. We have a diverse set of use cases, but what I will say time and time again is, that amazing moment when I get to meet someone through work, through colleagues, or maybe even outside. And then when I mention Fireflies, they're like, "Oh, I've seen Fireflies on one of my meetings." And that brings us a lot of joy. And to be able to say, to talk to someone who's experienced what we've built and seen it in those meetings is really, really exciting.
Like any great technology, voice transcription seems like magic when it just works. But you and I and a lot of our listeners know that it's not magic. There are a lot of hard technical problems you need to solve. What's the biggest technical breakthrough that you and the team have made?
So if we look back at 5 years ago in terms of this space, the amount of work that was needed to do ASR, automatic speech recognition, accuracy, dealing with accents, a lot of those challenges existed, right? And people were using things off the shelf. People were building internal tools to help tackle those problems. And so I think we take less credit, but in general, as an industry, we've moved forward. Voice has become like cloud computing in the sense that it's becoming cheaper, it's becoming more accurate, and it's like running water and electricity. So having good speech recognition was not a given 5 years ago. It might be a given today, right? When you have 90% plus accuracy, and there's amazing companies out there that are making groundbreaking work there. Our goal is, how do you take something that's like 85% of the way there and start enhancing it, improving it, and then applying it to practical business use cases, right? For us, people are having meetings. Meetings don't necessarily mean always good audio. Some people's mics work, some people's mics don't work. There's tons of background noise. People are using unique vocabulary in those meetings, right? Acronyms. I remember my time at Microsoft, we were almost speaking a foreign language in terms of the number of acronyms we'd throw every sentence. People tend to talk over each other. There's a lot of pauses. There's a lot of filler words. And the challenge that we had to solve was, how do you take something imperfect, make it as close to perfect as possible? And even there, how do you then deliver that, right? No one wants to read a 50-page transcript. So how do you allow people to consume meeting recaps and summaries afterwards? So there was both a AI, and technology improvement play that we got to grow on top of. And then there was also the usability play, right? How do you effectively implement AI into your daily workflows? So I think those were the two things that we were able to figure out. And also just in terms of the technology, Fireflies today has to join meetings across the world in over 100 countries every single day in, day out. And it's a participant on a meeting. So to have that technology be able to follow you around, join those meetings, know when to leave, know when to detect silence. So there's a lot of nitty gritty stuff that goes into it. So we're just really like constantly working on that angle as well.
So employees, certainly sales employees, but anyone in a corporate setting has an unfair advantage using a technology like ASR, certainly like what Fireflies does. And in the community, we know that the vast amount of training data that exists to train these NLP models is using traditional American English. How do we prevent these technologies from accidentally discriminating against non-native English speakers?
Yeah, so that's a constant challenge. It's about how you segment your data. That's really the starting point. We have a lot of markers that help us anonymize and improve the data based on where the meetings are happening, potentially the type of meetings that are happening, and then regions, right, that it's happening in. And today, Firefly supports English, and we're having plans to support foreign languages very soon, like Spanish and French. So some of the common requests we get are, yeah, how can I get it where I'm in 2 of my meetings, I'm using English, and a few other meetings, I want to use it in Spanish. So we constantly think about it. There is a product level challenge, right? Like, do you detect Spanish automatically when people switch from English to Spanish? Do you translate both? So there's these sort of things. But to your question about bias in training exists, right? Well, sometimes models are black boxes and you don't know what the output is going to be. And especially when you look at these like CNNs and massive models that are trained on large data sets, especially across the internet, bias is going to be introduced, specifically with ASR. And I think there's people that can speak with more authority on this. A lot of the original data came from, lab institutional like research, right? Maybe you pull up like recordings off online, but we have very real data like that we have to like make it work for. So there's something that works theoretically, and then there's something that works, where, when I mean theoretically, where the audio is perfect, the English is perfect. It's almost like someone's reading off a teleprompter. So it's very clear cookie cutter, sentences. Whereas when you're working with real world data, it's a lot more messy, and it's not a lot more straightforward. So there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of segmenting. Sometimes people are rolling out models that don't work, and then you have to revert. So sometimes a lot of change is not necessarily good, just because you're feeding in tons of random data. So the quality of data now matters a lot more than just the quantity of data. And the model itself, a lot of the times, is important, but it's really the data and the type of data that you're bringing in that matters. And you don't want to overfit and overtrain. You don't want to signal it and make it like only feed it like North American English accents, right? And then all of a sudden it misinterprets other accents. So it's just like in any other institution, you want to bring diversity and help train those models for the different types of scenarios that you're going to run into in the real world.
Has Firefly's OEM the voice engine from a third party, or does the voice translation and the voice quote finger quotes engine work take place in a way that's native to the Firefly's platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've done multiple approaches. We've worked with several partners, maybe over like half a dozen over the span of a couple of years. We've done work internally as well, and we've tested different things for different types of customers. So we can probably say that in terms of market research and in terms of like the technologies that are out there in terms of ASR, there's many, and we use a hybrid approach today as well. And there's some customers where we exclusively use a certain platform, or because they're going to be better suited for that sort of model or but that sort of customer segment. So we've done both. I will say that companies that are building a lot more tools internally or in-house, it's less of a bottleneck now, because I think there's a lot of great companies out there in the wild right now. Like, you can get the Googles of the world, you can get the AWS transcribes of the world, but there's also other startups, other firms that are just dedicated to this problem. And I think that it's going to be like AWS. I really believe it, where in the past you had to build your own, servers, your data warehouses, all that stuff to scale up. Now I think that with some of the companies out there, it'll be turnkey. It might not get you all the way out there. So in the early days, we didn't have a perfect solution. So we had to build ourselves and build the tools in-house. Today, we use a hybrid model where we might process something through a partner, and then we do cleanup on top. We do enhancements on top. But yeah, I think there is no clean solution today, but we are getting there.
So we just talked about the impact of bias and how these language models get trained. If you're sitting on top of someone else's technology, presumably you also take responsibility for the quality of their translation. How do you think about the need to vet a third-party product when you're ultimately responsible for potentially introducing bias into the product?
Yeah. We always look at the partners and folks that we evaluate across multiple scenarios. So how does it do in different scenarios? How does it do on real world data? How does it work for different language, geographies, accents, all of those? And then we have our own calculations. So there's your general calculations like word error rate. But we think word error rate doesn't always encapsulate everything you need for ASR. So there's other things like readability, unique word detection. So there's so many other things like that you have to. Punctuation is a huge thing. So there's many, many different factors. And we have our own internal score where we can overlay transcripts on top of each other, our work versus their work versus like the unedited versus the edited. And so we're constantly looking at it that way. So before it was just more like an eyeballs test. Now we actually literally quantify the delta between different providers, different like models, different changes. And then we try to then pick and deploy the model. Like we built our architecture in a way where we can deploy very quickly, different models for different segments, different vendors for different segments. And we like to see, feedback. So we have feedback mechanisms and in-app loops as well, where someone says, hey, this one was slightly off, like compared to the other ones I've gotten, or this one's really good, even better than something in the past. And so we tend to tweak and adjust based on that. The analogy I like to give is like when you go to the optometrist or when you plan to go get, like glasses or your vision check, they'll ask you, is one better? Is two better? Like, and then they'll try to keep giving you different options. And we try to do the same thing. So we want to always tweak and improve, but within the direction of where the customers want it and how they like it. Sometimes we've seen customers like the older versions of what we've delivered better than like newer updates. And so that's why I always say like change you want to look at from a cautious lens. Yeah.
I assume you store and train on customer conversation data. Is that right?
We have in-app or feedback loops where we are able to improve the models without bias. So in a sense that we anonymize the data. And let's say a user makes some sorts of edits or corrections to their transcript, we're able to feed that in and train it. Rather than like physically looking at the data and like getting human, we always believe that training at scale and without having to like, because there's other companies, what they'll do is they'll literally have people read and like edit and do all that. We don't do any of that. Like we don't want to touch your data. We don't want to read your data. Most of the feedback loop training that we do is user input. So if they say like this word was incorrect and they correct it, we'll try to improve it for next time, or we'll try to loop it. But we don't have people that like pull that data out, sit and edit it and feed it. Like that's not the approach we take. So we crowdsource the training back to the users itself. Yeah.
An incredibly hard and important problem to solve in NLP is automatically detecting PII, personally identifiable information. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, you don't want to train on people's credit cards or social security numbers, but in a meeting, in a conversation, things come up and they get dropped into dialogue, into conversation that gets transcribed and then fed into training sets. How do you mitigate for the impact of capturing and training on data that you don't want to be part of transcripts?
Yeah. So one of the things we like to do is when we do train on data, we like our try to experiment. We try to do it on our own meetings rather than customer meetings, because we have a large enough team today where we can look at diverse situations and circumstances. The other thing is we try not to cross pollinate. So in terms of like one model or one training set of information that we're getting, like from say sales meetings, we may not want to necessarily replicate that in other types of meetings. The most important thing is like, so we have PCI redaction that's coming into the works. It's less of an issue for us because we're not in the contact center, call center spaces where people are talking about that type of sensitive information. But in general, and it's a really important conversation to have, is when you are dealing with sensitive data, sensitive meetings, like the constant thought process for us is how can we touch it as little as possible, and how can we essentially, like make sure that like the data like is intact. So like, for example, like how we think about encryption, how do we think about scaling the platform without having to even like maybe process the data on our end. Maybe we can have a private cloud approach for larger customers where it resides in their thing. So your data is yours to keep. And then also like potentially like opt-out mechanisms or opt-in mechanisms. So there's many, many different ways. Yeah.
So I was obviously thinking about GDPR compliance in Europe or CCPA in California, where I have the right to be forgotten. So is there a mechanism where I can see what Fireflies has stored of my meetings? And can I presumably I can't opt out my voice versus others in a meeting, but what control, given that I own my data and you co-own it because you might train models on it,
yeah.
What allowances do I have to be able to restrict how my voice data is used?
Yeah. So if you're part of a meeting and then you've had that data essentially, or like that meeting and you're part of it, so you can essentially log in and then request that data to be deleted. So we have that thing where, for example, you need that data to be deleted, or any data pertaining to you that you had run. We're able to identify based on the meeting, right, and the participants on that meeting and the calendar metadata. So we typically like to put give the responsibility and onus and freedom to the users to tell us, and then we'll wipe that data. So once that data is deleted, it's gone. Like we're not going to go train on deleted data, right? So like we're not going to do those sort of things. Also, the type of customers we tend to work with today ending up becoming bigger companies, right? Fortune 1000, these sort of customers. So for us, like how we handle data, how we handle GDPR, how we think about, like SOC 2 compliance, something we had gotten recently, and like how we have layers of control in terms of access to data. So a lot of those are things that are in place, and then call compliance as well. So sometimes people use tools where you don't even know that you're being recorded or transcribed. Whereas with Fireflies, because the assistant is on the meeting and it's almost explicit, so people almost have a conversation about, oh, hey, by the way, this is an AI note taker. I'm going to have it record and transcribe. It's not something that's sitting in the back. And if for whatever reason they want to kick it out of the meeting, they can right within, and then it'll stop. So giving people more freedom and flexibility, that's like been a really big thing. We also have things like alerts and notifications before a meeting. So if I toggle on a notification thing, it'll send out a notification to the person I'm talking to or the team that I'm talking to. Hey, Krish just invited Fireflies to this meeting. This is what I do. I record and transcribe. It's for note-taking purposes. If you'd like to opt out, here's a button, and then I won't join this meeting. So again, giving transparency and flexibility back to users, because we wouldn't want to capture something or store something that you wouldn't want. So, and if there were, for whatever reason, someone did not inform you or didn't go through like the regular checks, we would want to absolutely make sure that like that data is gone or like deleted upon request.
So I've said before on this show, and I believe AI is the new UI and voice is the new app. And if that's the case, if you even agree with me about that statement, and voice will become ubiquitous as a computing input mechanism, what are your thoughts on how being recorded changes the nature of how I interact with other people in meetings. So I think differently about what I say if I know it's on the record, going to be transcribed, searchable in perpetuity.
Yeah. So I think that the benefits or the value that people get on top do outweigh like this idea of like complete secrecy, complete I gotta like constantly make sure, because at the end of the day, the people that are using Fireflies are in a collaborative setting in meetings and want to share. It's similar to what you would say on email. It's the same thing, right? You might be on an email loop. You might have to deal with like an angry customer response. You're not going to swear at the customer. You're going to be not going to be mean to them. So it's the same thing, right? People exercise professionalism in a lot of those conversations. So maybe one thing that people will cut off on is like gossiping or talking bad about a certain customer or coworker. So those sort of things. The other thing is we're fully remote as a company. And so we've gotten to see Fireflies being used when we were like a 5-person team to now like a 100-person team, and how different people have access to that in our repository or in our channels. So, my teammates could have a meeting and then I can go back into the repository and the channels and go access it because I wasn't able to attend. So yeah, I'm sure people have that at the back of their mind, right? Like, I think I'm not going to be naive and say, no, everything is the same as always. But when you think about customer calls, recruiting calls, when you think about, like the efficiency gains that people get from sharing that information, it's far more, I think the value that they get far exceeds some of like these other concerns. The other thing is people are now much more aware and comfortable like of using not just like meetings, but like async communication, right? Like Loom to record. One of the biggest features that I love to use in Slack is like their audio voice recording capability, which Fireflies will also be able to index and save soon with some new updates we're rolling out. But like the ability to communicate by voice and then have that information translated, because I'm speaking at maybe 150 words per minute, I'm typing 50 words, 40 words per minute. So I can convey a lot more in a meeting. And so if I have a meeting with you and then you're a customer and you give me some feedback or a feature request, instead of having to translate that manually back to my team, I can literally go into Fireflies, highlight that 20-second clip, create a soundbite of it, and then share that excerpt with my team. It ensures consistency, clarity, make sure that your voice is heard rather than me diluting or distilling it. And so we've had many, many times where having the voice of the customer, the voice of the teammate, voice of, the people inside of your organization, it just completely changes it. So yes, I think go back 3-4 years ago, they're like, oh, do I want this meeting recorded? Do I want this meeting transcribed? Do I want this meeting searchable and in my team repository? Yes. And for those people that have those requirements, we have several privacy things, like where I can make it private and it can only be seen by me or only by my participants, or I can put it in a private, I can lock the meeting essentially so no one else can access it. So we have those sort of things that we've built over the years in terms of privacy and viewing access, similar to like Google Docs. Like there's a lot of some stuff that we do there.
Krish, I got to get you off the hot seat, but I got to get your take on one more question before I let you go. I said kind of casually, voice as being the new app. First off, do you even agree, as someone who's a pioneer and on the bleeding edge of voice, and if you think that voice will become the predominant computing input mechanism, how long before we kind of invert the current paradigm where we're primarily doing computing tasks text first? How long before it becomes a voice first computing environment?
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that, Dan, because when we started Fireflies, the vision was, can I just say something and make it happen? Similar to when I'm with Siri or Alexa or Google Home, and I can just say something, play this song, pull up this information. Sometimes amazed at like the questions I can say by doing OK Google and getting really, really incredible answers to questions that I've asked, right? Like the semantic understanding. So I think we've solved the first layer of the challenge, which is actually getting really highly accurate ASR. The second part of the challenge is the NLP and NLU in a business context, because that is a lot more complicated than I would say in like a consumer context. So one of the things we've rolled out recently is for project management systems like Asana, ClickUp, Trello, where I can say like a voice command on this meeting, and then automatically creates that in my Kanban board, like as a task or a next step. So that's simple use case, but again, that's like where is voice becoming the new UI? Yes, that's a really good example of that, where I don't have to go back afterwards. How can I get work done in the meeting itself, right? So that's something that I think about. And can I just say it and like just wish it and make it happen? If you think about like Uber and Amazon, and like click a button, a car comes to me. I click a button, I get something delivered in the real world. In the workplace, can I just say something with my voice and have that work, automatically done? Like, hey, create a report of our last like earnings call and like put this stuff in place and show it to me, or make a follow up to reach out back to Dan next week, and it creates an automatic task for me that's on my like to-do list. So simple things. And then as the NLP, NLU gets better, maybe we can go a lot further. And like, I don't have to work inside those ERP systems and stuff afterwards, because by the time I finish end or click end on my meeting, all that stuff is taken care of, outside. Like all those workflows get kicked off right as I leave my meeting.
Those are brilliant examples. To me, the crescendo will be when I can fully manage my email with voice. So not dictate the body of an email, but just conversationally do anything I would today to send and receive email. I like that you mentioned Slack and the integration there, but I feel like we're still kind of nibbling around the edges in terms of, and Asana and Trello, ClickUp, other things you mentioned, but it doesn't feel like we're at the point where you take something that's such a familiar task like email and say that voice is close to becoming the predominant input mechanism for email. Is that,
Yeah.
do you think, is there a time? Is it 5 years,
Yeah.
10 years away?
Maybe 5 years, maybe even less. Like what you just said to me is really interesting. So when we go to like our business admin, or if you have a secretary or an assistant, personal assistant, and be able to say, hey, can you send a thank you note to, Dan, and let them know A, B, and C, and they'll take care of it. Imagine if with like the way NLP gets or GPT-3 gets, some of these tools where I can say that to a voice assistant or a chat bot and have that thing done. I think that'll be magical. Even if the technology gets there, I still want to review it first, and make sure, and then I hit yes. But that just got me like an idea. I think with GPT-3 today, they probably could create something like that, because of how realistic the responses are. I was reading about how on Reddit, they had a GPT-3 bot that started replying to different posts for almost 7 days, and no one recognized that it was a bot and not a human. So there's good stuff you can do with it. There's also like crazy things you want to be watchful for. But I think that we have a sniff of the technology right now. I would say it. Yeah.
Well, Krish, when that vision comes to fruition, I'm going to have you back, and we're gonna be discussing that. What do you say?
I'm excited, and I think the last couple of years has been a tremendous gain for the industry in terms of voice, in terms of NLP. And I was more skeptical than anyone else, right? And then now I'm very optimistic about how fast things are improving.
There's no more exciting domain, no more upside, no faster pace of innovation than within voice. So appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Krish, where can the listeners learn more about you and Fireflies?
Yeah, for Fireflies, you just can go to fireflies.ai. You can see it, try it out, play around with it, use it in your meetings. We're pretty active on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well, Krish Ramineni. So those are probably like the go-to places for us to engage, interact. And we're always putting out new content as well on our blog. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, there you have it. That's the future of voice, and start of many more conversations like this that we'll be having on this show. That is a wrap for us this week. I'm your host, Dan Turchin of AI and the Future of Work. But we're back next week with another fascinating guest.